In the year 1903 AD, the Roman Empire didn't fall to a barbarian horde. It wasn't ripped apart by a revolution. No, something far more bizarre and way more cynical happened. The empire was put up for sale, and it was sold to the highest bidder, just like a piece of property. This is that story, a tale of incredible greed, cold-blooded murder, and the day the most powerful empire on Earth was auctioned off.
Now, that's not a line from some historical fiction novel. Those are the actual words of Cassius Dio, a Roman senator and a historian who lived through this. He was an eyewitness. Can you imagine? He saw firsthand the moment the empire's honor just completely shattered. You can feel the shock and the shame in his words, right? It's the sound of a system eating itself alive.
So, how in the world did this happen? I mean, this wasn't just some random act of insanity. It was the explosive climax to a political system that had been rotting from the inside for years. To really get what happened at the auction, you first have to understand the criminals who held it.
And our story really kicks off with a murder. But not just any murder. We're talking about the murder of an emperor by his own bodyguards, a crime that created the very power vacuum they were about to exploit for a massive payday.
So, let's meet the Praetorian Guard. On paper, they were the emperor's most loyal soldiers, an elite force stationed right there in Rome. But in reality, their loyalty always had a price. They were pampered, got double pay, and were miles away from the tough life on the frontier. Over time, they became this incredibly dangerous political force. They knew that whoever they decided to protect ruled. And well, whoever they turned against died.
And believe me, things fell apart with breathtaking speed. First, the absolutely corrupt Emperor Commodus is strangled. The next day, a respected old general named Pertinax takes over. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy who immediately tried to clean up the financial mess and restore some discipline. But the Praetorians? They had grown fat and lazy. When Pertinax couldn't pay them the huge bonus they thought they deserved, they didn't just file a complaint. Nope, they marched on the palace, and after just 87 days, they murdered their new emperor.
This murder, this act of treason, it led directly to the most audacious business transaction in Roman history. With the emperor's head on a spear, the Praetorians were now in total control, and they had a revolutionary and, frankly, a deeply cynical idea.
Suddenly, the Praetorians had this stunning realization. Why install a new emperor and just hope he pays you when you can make him pay you first? They figured out that the power to grant the throne was worth way more than any bonus, so they decided to monetize the imperial purple itself.
And this leads to one of the most surreal scenes you can possibly imagine. You have two guys competing for the throne. The first is Sulpicianus, the murdered emperor's father-in-law, who's already inside the Praetorian camp trying to negotiate. The second, a fabulously wealthy senator named Didius Julianus, who literally rushes from a dinner party to the camp gates when he hears the news. What happened next was a literal bidding war, with Sulpicianus haggling from the inside while Julianus is outside shouting his offers up at the walls.
Sulpicianus makes a really strong opening bid. He promises a massive 20,000 sesterces to every single guard. For a second, it probably looked like he had the whole thing locked up.
But then, from outside the walls came the knockout blow. Julianus, who was not about to be outbid, raises the offer to a staggering 25,000 sesterces per man. The Praetorians just couldn't believe their luck. The deal was done. They swing open the gates and declare Didius Julianus the new emperor of Rome.
To put that number into perspective for you, 25,000 sesterces was a life-changing amount of cash. We're talking nearly a decade's worth of pay for a regular legionary soldier who was out there fighting on the frontier. Julianus didn't just promise a bonus, he promised to make every single one of those guards rich beyond his wildest dreams.
Okay, so was it really a literal auction with a guy shouting going once, going twice? Well, Cassius Dio, our eyewitness, he described it as if it were an auction. It was a powerful metaphor for the disgrace. It's pretty likely the story got exaggerated later on by Julianus's enemies to paint him as this totally illegitimate ruler who just bought his way into power. The truth? It's probably a mix of both. A frantic, greedy bidding war that got spun into a legendary tale of corruption.
So, Julianus had bought the prize. He owned it. But as he was about to find out, having the title of emperor and actually ruling the empire, well, those are two very, very different things. His reign would become a masterclass in failure.
The result? A reign of just 66 days.
That's it. Julianus bought the most powerful job in the world, and he couldn't even hold on to it for a single season.
I mean, his problems were immediate, and they were overwhelming. The people of Rome were disgusted. They were literally shouting insults at him in the streets. The Senate only confirmed his position because they had Praetorian swords at their necks. And even worse, Julianus quickly realized he didn't actually have enough cash on hand to pay the enormous bribe he'd promised. And, most crucially, out in the provinces, powerful generals with loyal legions refused to accept an emperor chosen in some shady backroom deal. When the end finally came, Julianus was supposedly just bewildered. His last words show a man who fundamentally misunderstood what power in Rome was all about. He thought the transaction was the end of the story. He completely failed to realize that in the Roman Empire, you couldn't just buy legitimacy, you had to command it, and he commanded nothing.
So as Julianus's authority is crumbling in Rome, a new power was rising on the frontier. A man who saw the auction not as a crisis, but as one heck of an opportunity.
And that man was Septimius Severus, the governor of Pannonia. This guy was a tough, experienced general with a powerful army that was loyal to him. And in a brilliant political move, he didn't declare war for the throne itself. No, he declared himself the avenger of Pertinax, which frames his march on Rome as an act of justice, not just naked ambition.
What Severus did next was just brutally efficient. He marched his legions toward Italy at a record pace. The Praetorians, the same guys who sold the empire, had absolutely no stomach for a real fight against battle-hardened legionaries. They completely abandoned Julianus. The Senate, seeing which way the wind was blowing, quickly sentenced Julianus to death. And then, in his very first act as emperor, Severus disbanded the entire Praetorian Guard in disgrace. The kingmakers had been unmade.
So Julianus was dead, Severus was the new emperor, but the events of 193 AD would leave a permanent scar on the Roman Empire. The price of power had now been established, and it was going to change Rome forever.
In the end, the auction's real damage was symbolic. For 2 centuries, Rome had run on this sort of illusion called the Principate, the idea that the emperor was just the first citizen, ruling with the consent of the Senate. While the auction completely shattered that illusion, it laid bare the simple truth. Rome wasn't a republic in disguise anymore. It was a military dictatorship, and the only currency that truly mattered was cold, hard steel.
And this quote from Severus to his sons on his deathbed, it perfectly sums up the new reality. This was the brutal lesson he learned from the auction. Forget the Senate, forget the people, pay the army, and you rule. This grim philosophy became the operating manual for the next 100 years, and it directly fueled the devastating cycle of civil wars and assassinations that we now call the crisis of the 3rd century.
And that leaves us with this question. The auction of 193 AD is way more than just a bizarre historical footnote. It is a chilling, cautionary tale. It shows you what happens when the very institutions meant to protect a state decide to sell it instead. It's a moment that proves an empire's foundation isn't stone or marble, but trust. And once that's sold, it can never truly be bought back.